Hello, hello, and welcome to another Rise Up TX Talks. This is the podcast where we dive into ideas and strategies on how to transform experience into business growth. I'm your host, Camila Ferreira, an award winning CX leader, an author of Long Live CX, available on Amazon, and an international speaker. Today, the subject is the execution gap. Why companies know what to do, but still don't do it. And my guest today is Christopher Donaleski from AI Advisory Group. So, with no further ado, Chris, thank you so much for being here. And
Yeah.
please take a moment to introduce yourself and let people know how you transform experience into business growth.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Camila. So Christopher Donaleski, I with AI Advisory Group, I'm also creator of the Validated Mind. And what we do is we help companies really connect and create trust between strategy and execution during critical transitions. We use a decision intelligence to do this, and one of the areas that we like to focus on is really what we're going to be talking about today, which is an execution gap, which we also kind of AKA the trust gap. And I think that it can play in different areas, in different areas of the business, in different ways. So yeah, no, thank you for having me, and I'm really looking forward to diving into some of these conversations.
Absolutely. And I want to invite the audience to raise questions as well. I have lined up a few questions for you, but just a sneak peek. Chris and I were talking just before going live, and I can tell you the solution he has come up with is just amazing and something that every single organization needs. So let's just dive in, and you're going to get to know more about what he does and why this is so relevant. And to kick things off, so please, most leaders believe execution fails because teams resist change, which is definitely one of the reasons. But from your experience, where does execution actually start breaking down long before resistance shows up?
Yeah. So I love the question, and really, when you think about resistance, resistance is not it's not a root cause; it's a symptom. Resistance shows up because something before that happened. So friction is good, but it also can be really bad. I start, rubbing my hands together to get warm. If it's cold, that's really great. I'm getting some warmth. I'm creating some friction. I'm causing something good to happen. If I start doing it too much, though, maybe my hands start falling off eventually. So I think that when we look at something, we have to say, okay, what's the reason why it's happening, and is it a good outcome or bad outcome? We talked about something right before the show too, in regards to how outcomes is so important to that value is value. Something's valuable. It doesn't mean that it's valuable to somebody else. It can be valuable to one person, it can be valuable to other people. And so when you look at like this execution fails, and you have resistance that is there, you have to ask, okay, what happened beforehand, and who was it valuable to? Because in my experience, in most cases, when we deal with businesses, the resistance can be valuable to people that are listening. The strategy that caused execution to follow, that created resistance, that strategy could be valuable, but it doesn't mean that it's valuable to everybody in the same way. And so when we start tapping into what is valuable to you individually and what is valuable to somebody else individually, and then how does that align with the value that you're trying to create as a company, now we're starting to have a better conversation. Now we're able to understand why resistance is happening. Is because someone said, this either is not aligned with my value, or what I think is valuable. I think another way to explain this would be reviews. When's the last time you bought something? And before you bought it, you went to the review section. Now, I hate going to the review section because I think it's a trap, because it's one of those things that is so dependent on context that we don't have. Like if I could go to Amazon and I could look at a review and I could say, okay, this is a 5-star review. This is for a vacuum, and I want to get a vacuum. And I'm looking at this 5-star review, and this person has never used a vacuum ever before. They're 18 years old, never cleaned in their life. They have a new apartment they just got into after leaving home, and they realize that I need to clean my floors. I'm gonna get a vacuum, and they wrote a review, and it's 5 stars. This might have been the worst vacuum that someone has ever used before, but they have no idea because, well,
No reference.
they have no reference, right? The same thing with a grill, right? You go, I'm looking for a barbecue grill. I want to go ahead and get an amazing barbecue grill, and I've got 1 star review for this grill that I was actually thinking I was going to buy. And I get this 1 star review, and I'm like, well, this is crazy. This must not be a really great grill. But what if this person thought it was a smoker and they were trying to use it inappropriately? I have no context behind this stuff, right? And so when you have companies that are building strategy, a lot of times they're not capturing the data they need to on their people to understand that context well enough to understand, is that valuable? Is what I'm saying valuable? Is what I'm doing valuable? And when you don't have that context, you end up start getting symptoms, and then you start addressing these symptoms before you actually address what's really causing them in the first place.
The root cause. Oh, I love that you mentioned this because in this conversation around AI, so I'm quite sure you have seen this study from MIT stating that 95% of AI implementation failed some way or another. And that once we break it down, there is a lot of resistance from the existing organization, from the existing employees, and context. So I always try to put myself in somebody else's shoes. And if I'm working for an organization, there is all of these AI hype and conversations going on, and people afraid of losing their jobs.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, my leader comes in and says, "Oh, you're going to implement AI." It triggered a lot of anxiety. I can start looking for another job. So instead of connecting and helping these organizations to have a better implementation of the AI, it actually turns out that I disconnect and I start looking for something else. And this is what you were saying, lack of context. So
Yeah.
the fact that we're going to implement the AI doesn't mean that we're going to get rid of people. But if we do not give the context, if we do not bring them along to the conversation, if we do not kind of create this sense of a belonging that we are solving for the clients where they are part of it, you are at a risk that they're going to disengage and look for something else. So I think that giving context in any transformation is so much important for you to have the buy-in, for you to have the connection and the engagement and the knowledge from the different kind of parties involved. I don't believe that just one person knows it all. No, it's actually the other way around. And bringing different perspectives, being inclusive of different thoughts is what's going to make this transformation even stronger.
Yeah. I always say, like, more context creates more confidence. And the reason we lack confidence is because we not enough content, because content's important as well. But so much we have content, we don't have context. And the same thing that makes AI conversation work really well is context. You know what also makes things work really well is human communication. You know what also helps with that? Context. Right? So we're not very, AI and especially the AI that people know of today within these kind of LLMs and the machine learning, the chat GPT, the Anthropics, the Geminis, all the people that typically when they think AI, that's what they're thinking of. They're not thinking about all the stuff behind the scenes. They're thinking about what they interact with, which is the vibe coding, the conversational AI, right? These types of workflows, or you used to be RPAs, and now you're kind of embedding that into with automations through AI, agentic AI. The reason why it's so important though is because we started thinking about this as a machine and a robot, but we're not thinking about it as that it's designed to think and to think kind of how we do, right? So the interaction, the same way that we interact with you and I having a conversation, should be the same way that we interact with AI, but we don't. We treat it almost like a tool, which it is a tool. Don't get me wrong; it's not a solution. It is still a tool, but we treat it like a traditional tool. We treat it as hammer hit. Like I've got something, and then of course we use the same tools that we have, and we say, okay, well now I can use this. How many times I always carry a knife with me? I'm in Texas, so I always carry a knife with me, and I always have a knife. But it's amazing how many things you can use a knife for. I've unscrewed things with a knife, cracked open bottles with knives, and of course using it to do normal knife things. But like at the end of the day, when you have tools and you're not aware of how you can actually use it for what its intended purposes are, or you mislabel it as something else, you start to lose context. And when you can increase that context, when you can increase the ability to say, look, how do I use this tool effectively? How do I make sure that I give context to that way that how I interact with things? You can start to get, you can start to understand it better, and then you can start to use it better. So yeah, no, I love that. I think that it's something that we need to talk about more. Is when you talk about people being scared of AI in companies when they're implementing it. I run through that, or run across that all the time. And you know what's more scary is that these companies are trying to run it and jam it down someone's throat before they understand it themselves, and they haven't taken a step back and say, wait a second, let's just be truthful. If your job is task oriented, if your job is to make coffee, you're going to be automated. If your job is to copy and paste, you're going to be automated. If your job is to do things that mechanically have been able to be altered over the years, and now we have robotics, automations, and other types of resources that allow us to take a task and make it faster, because that's all it does. It just speeds things up. When you think about like what technology does, it's just an accelerator. All it does is speed things up.
Yeah.
So if your job is a task, you are potentially going to be replaced. Let's just say it out loud. This idea that companies come out and say, hey, we're implementing AI, and don't worry, your job is safe, is BS, is what it is. What they should do is they should come out and say, look, we're going to be implementing AI. We know this is the future of business technology. We understand that there's a lot of potential here, but there's a lot of stuff we don't know. But we do know that we're going to be starting to implement this. We are going to now upskill. We're going to transfer. We're going to reallocate. And there are potential people in this organization that may not get the cut. They may not be here after a year, 6 months, or whatever it may be, because they have not grown, or we have been able to evolve as a company, and we don't need you anymore. That kind of sounds like to me when a kid leaves their home to start their own family.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
When we think about these things of like these identity shifts, that's what it really is. When it comes from whether it's customer experience, whether it's operational efficiency, whether it's financial in nature, whether it's technical in nature, whether it's human in nature, it doesn't matter. We actually follow these interesting patterns. And when we relate to these things in very different ways, like a child growing up, becoming an adult, and leaving home, is actually the same way that companies mature. And this idea that, you're going to start with a company and 30 years later, you're going to maybe still be that company. Those days are long over.
Yeah.
They just don't happen anymore. And I actually think that they should have never happened, because I think that most companies are not structured in a way to continue to level up that person. What they do is they trap them in a position, and they limit their potential as a person. And so really, we need to be rethinking about how we look at this. And companies should absolutely adapt and use AI, and fire when need fired, lay off when need to lay off, and promote when they need to promote. The problem is they're not looking at the right metrics. And then the other problem is that you have people in those positions that have such an identity around those that they say, oh, well, poor me. Oh my gosh, like this sucks. And I can't do anything, and I've got to go look for a job. When they really should be thinking of, you know what? This is a way for me to level up. This is a way for me to grow. This is a way for me to have a completely different experience than what I thought I was going to have. And there's a quote that I'll end this little segment on, which I think is relevant here. Hermosi says this quite often. I love this quote, but he says, most people live their life 6 months at a time, and they just repeat over and over again. And I'm like, man, that cannot be me. And so I make sure that is something that I drive home every single day, is how was that 6 months, the new 6 months of my life. We're coming up on New Year's, we got everybody's New Year's resolutions, right? We what's the next 6 months look like? Because if it looks like the last 6 months, like maybe we're doing something wrong, and I make sure that I'm intentional about that. Every 6 months should look different.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, there's not so much to unpack on what you just said. The answer itself was just a master class. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that we should no longer kind of rely or live based on tasks, but outcomes.
Yeah.
I think that's so boring when you assign a task to someone.
Right.
Oh my goodness. And then you have to micromanage. No, 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 not at all. So what are you trying to achieve for you, for the client, for us, for the organization? And then you bring your how into the conversation. Because otherwise, at least to me, one of the biggest mistakes I see organizations making is you bring someone from the market. You kind of have an open position, you try to fulfill with someone internally, but you couldn't, and then you go to the market because most likely you are looking for innovation. You are looking for fresh eyes, if you will. And then this person comes in, and the very first thing you do is to put this person in a box.
You put handcuffs on them, right? I mean, that's 100%, 100%.
And
Yeah.
then everything that you have invested in bringing innovation, in bringing kind of a free, fresh oxygen has gone away.
Yeah.
Because by the time this person steps in, you're going to determine how you want this person to behave, what you want this person to do. So what about the innovation? What about the diversity? It's over. So similarly to what you were saying about AI, and I love to say that AI is a tool and not a toy.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. 100%.
It's definitely a tool. Are
Yeah.
we going to bring that innovation? Are we going to kind of invest in developing people? Hey, let's use AI.
Yeah.
Because the more you know about it, the more innovative, or most likely the more innovative this company, the organization is going to be.
Yeah.
But I still see leaders saying, oh, I don't want this from ChatGPT. If I have to get this from ChatGPT, I do it myself. No, it's actually the other way around. So let's kind of bring in the open the conversation about artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
What are you doing? How can you do?
Yeah.
Because
No, I
start better using the tools
Yes.
that we have available. And if you think, Chris, most companies, the majority of them, they use just a small percentage of the tools they have available.
Oh, sure they do. Yeah, we track that crazy, and it's like typically it's under 15%, which is insane, right? I want to go back to something you said though, because the toy versus tool, because I want to delve into that just a little bit, because I love that, but I want to there's some caveats that I want to kind of talk to you about.
Sure.
So when so toy versus tool, and I want to just like kind of cling on that for a minute. And the reason I want to is because AI, I think most people are treating like toys.
Oh, 100%.
But I think it's okay when you're in a playpen, when you are in a sandbox, when you're in an area that you're trying to do discovery. We have forgotten how to play as adults. And when we are talking about, like, I've brought this up several times, and it's something that it's always, it's a fun topic to talk about, but like play imagination. It's like nails on a chalkboard for me. When my kids are like, hey dad, come and play with this thing, and it's like, well, where is it? Like, well, it's not here. It's like we're making a, and it's like, okay, that's great, but like I can only do about 5 minutes of that until I'm just like, okay, I'm good, I'm done. Like this is kind of weird. And I know I should probably, I'm a horrible parent, I don't know, but it's so funny because like I just have a hard time with imagination play. Especially when it's just, I don't know, I think maybe we just mature and we grow out of that state. But like in AI, when we actually can learn how to play again, we can actually explore, discover, be curious about things more. But the catch is, you can't take those same play toys and then go expect to build a house, like a real house, not an imaginary house, but a real house. And you definitely can't take the skill set that you have by being able to play with those toys and all of a sudden be able to be some, master carpenter that allows you to do these things, or an engineer that's able to tie all the pieces together. So I think what happens is we talk about these execution gaps, right? This whole idea behind what's causing this. And I think that you have to understand the mindset that you're bringing into one area, and that sometimes you have to mature into a different mindset to be able to really accommodate those areas. So when you talk about businesses that are saying, hey, look, we understand that we don't have the skill set, we don't have the type of role or the things that we need, that we know we need to bring in house. What they're doing is they're saying, hey, we want someone else to play with. But they're not bringing them into a future state of building house. They're building them into a current state of the sandbox. And they're saying, hey, you're coming into our sandbox and you're playing around these parameters and you need to fit these set of rules. We're not letting them come in as the master, or as the expert, as the person that knows kind of what to do, and saying, hey, look, we have materials, we have resources. How do we do this? What's the best way to do this? Now, then you can go back and forth. Yes. But we're not giving them that ability. And so that you're creating an execution gap because your strategy is built in something of your old way of thinking. And your execution is still baked in that same way of thinking. You haven't been able to transfer from strategy to execution in a way that makes sense, that allows people to do what they do best. Steve Jobs said this really well, right? He said that I don't hire smart people so I can tell them what to do. I hire smart people so they can tell me what to do. And I think you're tapping into that exact phrase, right? So,
and I think that over time we kind of unlearn how to be creative and imagine different things. And I was having this conversation with my therapist the other day about kids, right? So you are a parent, and when you give your kid a toy, especially when they are younger, in your mind you expect, I don't know, that you give them a car, they're going to push the car in a way that you would do. But they start looking at the car and see, well, the car can fly, I can control the car, I can do so many things with the car. Because they do not have this pre-concept that you need to push the car in a certain way that you already know. Yeah. And that's where imagination flourished. And that's exactly what I was talking about, bringing people from the market and even from within the organization, but giving them the freedom to imagine things differently. Yeah. Most of the times, we are limiting their ideas in a way that we want, in pushing the car the way we would do, rather than let them look at the car and think of different ways. That's why not all companies, or only the companies that do have this mindset, like Steve Jobs, that I'm going to hire people to tell me how I work and not the other way around, those are the organizations that actually thrive, because you were open to what is new and never before imagined, if you will, right? Yeah. But speaking of, we're talking about validating decisions that I like very much, because you have your sandbox, and I love this. I do think that we should invest more on sandbox concept, on kind of taking people from their desks and their regular routine and let them play, let them go to the playground, if you will. But validating those ideas is quite important before you actually execute or really start with execution mode. So what does decision validation look like in practice, and why do leaders so often skip this step, in your opinion?
Yeah. So validation is something that we talk about in data, especially now as AI is starting to be embedded and implemented in organizations. A lot of it comes down to, well, what's the quality of your data? And is that data been validated? The problem with that is that when we look at these metrics, these traditional metrics, operational cost, project cost, performance metrics, financials, P&L, cash flow, EBITDA, all these different things that we look at, we're validating that off of data, but we don't actually validate the decisions that we're making. And so what I mean by that is that you could have two people that are looking at the same exact operational and financial data models. We could actually add tech into that if you want to, but initially businesses are made at the operational and financial models. Technology is typically made as after the fact. What are we going to do about this? How are we going to improve this? How are we going to mitigate this, et cetera, et cetera. But no one's looking at the decision validation, and that's what we look at. And the reason we look at this is because you can have two people look at the same exact report, the same data, the same picture. Take any content you want, and you have two people look at it. Mm-hmm. And without any context, without any prompts, without anything, ask them what they see, what they gather from it, what's their review of it, what's their perspective. And in most cases, I would say all cases, but in most cases, you're going to have some similarities. In all cases, you'll never have 100% alignment with what their feedback is. Why is that? It's because they are all looking at things very different, but they're validating that data differently. And so I've identified in through the validated mind, we validated 5 different validators. So we track this into which we call the valid system, VALID. So V is your verity. These are universally known truths. So when we validate something, these are the areas I'm talking about with the operational and financial data models. This is something that we have evidence of. They're universally known truths. We understand that this data that we're looking at is a source of truth. We're basing our information and we're basing our decisions off of that data set. So it's what we call our verity model. Then you have association. This is the echo chambers, the group think, I feel this way about something because someone else already said something that's maybe impacted how I also perceive that information. So you, again, take the 2 people, they're looking at the same exact thing. Now, in the same room, let's have one person say something, and then that second person may end up doing a lot of ditto, right? Like, oh, I agree with what they're saying, and then this. But if they never said that in the first place, they might have a very, very different output. And so there's an association validation, and that works in very different. I won't go into it today, but there's different levels of each one of these groups. You have your lived experiences. Lived experiences, I love lived experiences because it's the most unique and the most differential pillar in our valid system. And the reason is because as you can imagine, these are heuristics. These are the way we experience things. So our lived experiences are very unique to each of us. Our cultural, our background, our bias. These are all kind of things that are built into how we have our lens of the world. And interesting enough,
have different experiences.
100%. But I think what's also unique is that you can have someone that is, you have 2 people that are brought up in maybe even the same family, the same schools, the same culture, the same church, the same work, all these things. And then you ask them to look at things and they're going to have different responses because somehow we have 11, I think it was 11 million bits per second that we actually intake from a lens perspective of the world of how we see things subconsciously, but we only consciously are taking 40 bits of information. So it's a massive amount of difference. And the 40 bits that you see are different than the 40 bits that I see. So even though you and I could be side by side watching a movie, we're going to have very, very different responses to that because of those things.
It happens quite often between me and my husband.
Yeah. Exactly. And so I also, on the counter of that, I think is really interesting because you can have someone with very different backgrounds that are brought up super different. In different ecosystems, in different mechanisms of cultural environments, and completely different experiences. And you can put, this again, same content in front of both of them, and they actually have very, very similar analysis of those outputs. So I think it's very interesting when you look at those because it's very hard to track, but those are things that we're trying to track right now through our lived experience validations. And then lastly, we have institution. These are laws, legals. We talk about sandboxing. We talk about having some boundaries around things. This is what the institution allows you to do. It also puts in perspective of like authority or what we call relative authority. So these are areas of parents, teachers, lawyers, presidents, doctors. So if a doctor comes into you're going to doctor for a checkup or something, and a person comes in with a white coat, and you start telling them all the updates that you have for the year. And then they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not the doctor. Let me go get him or her for you." And you're like, "What? You just exercised a relative authority, institutional validation. You said, hey, I'm relating this position of authority, and I'm going to then give all this information out because I associate that there's a hierarchy of authority involved in that." Parents, like I said, when we talked about kids leaving the home, like there's a certain element that they still, put a lot of effort on how they do things. Their decision makeup is based off a lot of institutional validations over a period of time. And then lastly, desire. So desire, we get into how we want the world to be, how we want things to be. You actually can get into very interesting things of addiction and ambition in those different elements. So we can go layers deep into these valid frameworks. But how we look at the validation and why it's so important is because how we we talked about this before the call a little bit, and I'll explain a little bit more too, because I think the context again is very important here. So every decision we make is two parts. You have a what am I going to do? Now you can include the why, the how, and all those things in that, but really what it comes down to, what am I going to do? So I'm going to do something, and then the second part of that is the am I going to do it or not? So when you separate these two parts, you have essentially strategy and execution. So from a business perspective, if you have one individual making that decision, well, you're going to have a gap, the execution gap that we talked about. And for this episode, we're talking about this execution gap. But why do you have an execution gap? It's because that there's a level of trust in between that gap that we're trying to fill. We say that we have something we're going to do. As a business owner, we experience this through analysis paralysis. Trying to get all the information and saying that, well, if I have all this information, I'm going to be able to make a better decision. We know that's not true. So we know that verity, our V in our decision making process, doesn't. If we have 100% verity, it's still not going to determine if we have a better decision or not, and it's still not going to determine if we're going to move on that decision or not. So we can have all the information; it doesn't matter. The nice thing about individual decisions, though, is that the gap is shorter because the decision the part one and part two are closer together because it's the same person.
Yeah.
But now take this in organizations, and we have leadership making the strategy decision, which they're going to have different validators. They're going to have different lived experiences. They're going to have access to our verity data, our validated data, operational, financial. They're going to have a lot more understanding of the legal and financial parameters, the sandbox, if you will, that they have to play in to reach those. So they're going to make these decisions there. What they did not make, and what we find in our research, is that the association and the desire at the strategy level for leadership is very, very low. So that means that their vision on what they want on the outcome is super low. And it also means that the association of how they actually look at the people that it impacts is also very low. They haven't thought about the other people outside of that decision they're making from a strategy perspective. So now take that and say, well, now we have the execution. Well, who's executing it? It's not the leadership. It's everybody else.
Yes.
And if everybody else, they also now have to make a decision. And again, remember, every decision has two parts. So when we say that the strategy has a decision and its makeup, and you have one person making, or a group of people making in leadership, they're making I'm going to do this, and then we're going to do it. And their execution is different than the execution, because their execution is, well, go do this. It's not them actually taking action to do it. It's them to supervise doing it, to make sure that everything is in line, is to track the KPIs that they're measuring or not measuring, in most cases not measuring, as you know. And so, and definitely not the right kind. And then so the people that have to execute this, they're saying, oh, well, okay, I didn't have a strategy decision, but they do, because their first decision, their first part is whether I'm going to follow it or not. This ties well into our first question, the resistance. Why is there resistance? It's because they were never part and didn't definitely feel like they were part of that strategy decision. Yeah. So there's a huge disconnect. And now that gap, that execution gap, has been increased exponentially. So how do you align those two pieces? It's looking at the validators. It's looking at to say that, well, traditionally, people that are executing without a strategy that they've created, they have ownership of, that they were part of, they're having to execute in a very different mindset than the person that was creating that strategy to execute in the first place. So if we can align how they validate, we can say, hey, this person typically has a tendency to validate under a verity. They want to see the data. Okay, well, great. Maybe we can expose that to them. If someone is a desire validation and tendency to validate under desire of, big thinking and always want to just go after and go big or go home, and they want to have that, well, maybe we can give them some ownership of leading a team that allows them to implement that strategy. Give them a little more information. Give them a little bit more autonomy. If someone is a association then maybe we do group trainings that are done by peers as opposed to leadership or people that they may have disconnected from because of the way that the culture is within the organization. So these gives us different layers of data we can put on it and really start to understand that it's not about how much data you have. It's not even about how much, we talked about context. It's not about how much context you have sometimes. It's about how people tend to validate their decisions in the first place. When we can tap into that, we can actually, really take back the layers of why things are not working, why there's resistors, why the execution gap takes so long, why are we over budget after a year and a half of trying to implement something, why did we not think about training, why is training important, why is customer experience not thought about until support, why is all these things happening? Well, it's because we've not trained our businesses to think about the untangibles or the intangibles. They're thinking about the things they can see, the things that are familiar, the things that allow us to have a little bit less fear, but ultimately don't get us where we want to go.
Wow, this was jaw-dropping to say the list. Because what I learned about decision making here and validation is something I have never seen before, and I'm pretty sure that this will resonate with the audience as well. But while I was listening to you, there is a quote. I'm not entirely sure who said that, but
Okay.
I like it very much, and I kind of adopted this quote, which is, "We see the world the way we are, and not the way it is."
Yes.
And that's exactly what you were saying. So you and I can be in the same room. We may have kind of be born and raised in the same city, attend the same schools, and so on and so forth. But once we are in front of a problem or an opportunity, we are going to react differently.
Yes.
And most likely, you and I will try to convince each other to see the way we see things rather than trying to put ourselves on somebody else's shoes and seeing the world how you see it.
100%. Yeah. One of the biggest mistakes we make is thinking that everybody thinks like us, right? So, yeah.
And this to me is the core of customer experience. When people come to me and say, "Come, what do you think about it?" Is the ability of seeing the world, of moving away from the way you see the world and start seeing the world from somebody else's lens, right? Because then you're going to see it in a completely different perspective, and then by itself will challenge how you see things.
Yeah. Well, you're 100% right. And when you think about like why that is, because like at the end of the day, like it's like we can have this information, we can know these things, but then how do we actually apply it? And when you think about like people would rather be right than find truth. And we see this across the board, right? This is one of the reasons why I started looking down this road of validation in decision making and not just validation of data, is because I always feel like when everybody's going left, I'm the kind of person that goes right. Maybe it's that curiosity in me that I'm always like, oh, why didn't you, like, what's over there? I'm curious, right? But 86% of Google searches are confirmatory searches. So meaning that people are not trying to find out what is the truth. They're trying to find out if they're right. Yes. And we take that same exact process into AI. We take that process into our decision making. We take that process in everywhere we go. And when it comes down to the root cause, when you think about like, what is that and why is that? It's a simple 3-letter word: ego.
Oh, absolutely. Today I was having a conversation with my business partner about a new program that we are designing, and I was challenging some of not his ideas, but something that he was saying. And at the end of the day, he told me, "Cami, I don't want to be right. I want to win." It's like, oh, that's it. So it's not about convincing others of your ideas. It's about kind of leveraging somebody else's ideas in order for you to become stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know who said that. Someone said it recently, and I can't remember where I heard it from, but someone said like my first objective is to be right. My second objective is to win.
Yeah, and actually the other way around, right?
Because if I'm wrong, if I didn't win, but I'm still right, like that's actually maybe better. When you think about it, but what is right though? If right is right, and that's what we're going after, is that you're not trying to win an argument. Like for instance, you're debating something and you're not going to get there. Like leadership does this all the time, right? When it comes to the resistance that we have, is like they're so like, hey, we made a decision, we're going to go with it. And they don't know how to pivot. They don't know how to do it. But what happens when someone says, hey, but I don't think we should do it this way. And I'm going to give you some context of why I think that. And then they take time to listen. And then they say, oh, okay, so if we do this, we're going to go, we're going to bust our budgets. We're going to not make our quarterly earning for this because we've got to pivot. And if we don't, though, we're going to be going the wrong direction. Mm-hmm. So I'd rather be right than what? Than wrong or win. There's a difference. And so if you're going to lose, but you're going to be right, and I say right as in like truthfully right? Not as in like ego right of like, I'm right and you're wrong.
Depends on the context.
It does, but I think when you, and we can go into philosophy, right? But when you get into like absolute versus objective, and you can get into information and versus, knowable versus unknowable. But I think that when you think about like what that means, what the question you should be asking is the intent. What does the person really mean by that? What are they trying to accomplish? And I've always taken the position of trust the intent. I don't think anybody has the like an ill intent. Like it's never someone to.
I don't believe people wake up to make your life miserable.
I don't think so. Maybe there is one out there, and maybe there are some people out there that do that. But I truly do that. Yeah, but I'm with you. I think that the vast majority of people do not have an ill intent. Their intent is there, but there is structures within their makeup, how they see the world, that they haven't been able to break through. They haven't matured, or they haven't got to a position where ego is the enemy, and they haven't been able to take themselves away from that and really kind of be aware of how they're doing decision. They're making decisions within their world. And I think that is really the breakdown. Is like, if we can really get people to be aware of, one, what is the context and content of their decisions, how is it affecting and impacting other people, and what is the goal of this? If the goal is to do whatever X, and are we getting there by doing this? Does that produce this outcome? And if it does, let's keep on doing it. If it doesn't, let's pivot. And if we're there, then it makes a lot more sense. But I think everybody has their own way of thinking, and it gets in the way. Everybody has their ideas, their expectations, if you will, and it gets in the way.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem here is the ego. People bring their ego every day to the office or to their lives, and they prefer to be right than to learn and evolve and expand.
Yeah, I mean, I still do that. Like, it's something that I have to work at constantly. I mean, it's how we're designed. I mean, right? Like, it's part of us, and it takes effort to do that. So yeah, it's not easy by any means.
Oh, not at all. And you have to be constantly on top of yourself and challenging. Once again, am I shooting for being right, or am I shooting for learn and expand?
Yes.
But yes. I think that our default is to be right. And that's why we are constantly trying to prove our idea and convince others, rather than, like we were talking about, the sandbox of being kids, or letting ourselves to be more, let the imagination come into play. We unlearn over time. It's the same thing. Yeah. Am I allowing myself to see the world from somebody else's lenses, from their perspective, and then expand my way to see the world, or I'm just trying to kind of prove that I'm right, and the way I see the world is the right way?
Yeah. How do you feel like how do you think that people unlearn? Like, so I think like we unlearn things by just not doing them, right? Like, we get to a position where we're just like, I haven't done this in a while, so I kind of forgot. Like, outside of riding a bike, there's driving a car. I haven't driven a stick shift in forever, but I'm sure I could probably go, still driving a good stick shift. But there's a lot of times that we unlearn because we just stopped doing it. But there's a lot of times where we are doing things constantly that we should unlearn how to do. From a customer experience perspective, like I'm kind of putting this back on you, but I would love to kind of understand, how do you get someone to make a conscious decision to say, I'm going to unlearn this? Because I feel like that would be, it's hard to do. Like, you have to be in a completely different state of mind, and you almost have to consciously forget things, which is almost impossible. So I don't know. Is that something you've ever explored? Or
yeah, at the end of the day, to me, is like having this conscience that you don't know it all.
Yeah.
There are thousands and millions different ways of doing the same thing. Like you were saying, if the two of us are in front of a problem, and if you bring in 10 more people, 100 more people, 1 million more people, we're going to see this problem. We're going to approach this problem differently. So
Yeah.
the very first step is understanding and acknowledging that the way we're going to do things is not the only way.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
open to this diversity of thoughts, this diversity of problem solving, where you allow yourself not necessarily to unlearn, but to expand.
Oh, I like that. Not unlearn, but expand. Yeah, I mean, because yeah. So one of the exercises we do with our companies we work with is we'll bring in several people from different departments and actually do like put them in a hot seat. Like, hey, what's your problem? And we won't let the thing is we won't let them actually tell us how to solve it or how they're solving it. We'll tell everybody else like, hey, you need to solve this problem. I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm not in finance. Oh, I don't care. Like, just solve it. And it's amazing, like the creativity you find out and the questions they ask because they have no idea. And they end up actually allowing the person that has the problem to think about it differently and to somewhat unlearn it. But I like what you said. Like, I love what you said. It's not about unlearning. It's about expanding. I love that.
Yeah, you bring diversity to the way you see the world, because once again, we see the world the way we are and not the way it is.
Yeah.
But Chris, you won't believe me, that time went by.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I learned so much from you today. And what you do for your clients and for organizations is so much needed. And I think that people were able to understand at least a little bit of the decision-making process, the validation process, and so how important it is. But for us to wrap up, how can people learn more from you, where they can find you, and what are the projects that you have in flight?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way probably for people to connect is aiadvisorgroup.com. I've got all my links and content there at the site. We're kind of doing it's not a rebrand by any means, but we're kind of changing out systems for our validated mind research. And so that will be launching, relaunching in Q1 of next year. We're doing a soft launch now for that. That will allow people to have access to research papers, our marketing material. We're launching a practitioner program around getting people to kind of use the system to get different data sets to allow them to make better decisions. And then I also, from a content perspective, we have a podcast that we host throughout the year called Smidgen of Proof. We make 35,000 decisions every day. And most of those we make with a smidgen of proof. So it kind of goes off the decision making and decision intelligence framework. On top of that, with projects coming up, we're really altering and refocusing how we deliver value to the clients. As you mentioned, and as we talked about, there is a huge need for mindset shifts in organizations and how we think about technology, how we're thinking about advancing and using the tools and the potential of tools. But people and process have to come first. They always do. They always will. And that's never going to be something that changes. If we look at people process first, then everything else becomes just kind of, it falls into place. And so our approach is that we are not technology. We don't do technology implementation. We're technology agnostic. We work with other vendors and partners to do that. But what we come in is, again, that bridging the trust gap between strategy and execution during critical transitions. So companies that are doing M&A, companies that are doing reorgs, companies that are doing big change initiatives or digital implementations. We do training, we do mindset training. We'll come in and evaluate their business from a value growth acceleration perspective. And two of the biggest projects we're working on right now is actually some professional services. And we worked out a system right now where we're actually able to save one company 100 hours per project. So it's just amazing, some stuff. And I have to give it out to these companies that are saying, look, we don't want to do the traditional way of analysis. We don't want to look at these metrics and KPIs traditionally, how we're looking at just operational financial. We want to look at the intangibles. 80% of a business value is in their intangibles, but we're not measuring those and getting metrics on those today. So the companies that we're working with are, I think, super forward thinking. They're getting it right, and we're just honored to be associated with these projects, and more to come in 2026. 2026 is going to be an amazing year. So looking forward to it.
I have no doubt. And
Yeah.
as I said in the beginning, so it's definitely what you do is a game changer. So I'm pretty sure that people will go after you to learn more from you and get to know what you do. But on my end, I want to thank you very much for such an enlightening and valuable conversation. I learned so much from you in this episode. So,
That
and you,
feeling's mutual.
yeah, you also have your podcast. I want to invite the audience to go and watch your episodes as well.
Awesome.
But
Awesome. Thank you
this
so
is
much.
the very last episode of the year. So,
Awesome. Go with the bang.
The first season of Rise Up CX Talks. But thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for sharing so much with the audience today. And for you all, happy holidays, because
Yes.
this is the last one. We are a week from Christmas, and I can agree more with you. 2026 is going to be amazing.
Heck yeah. Let's go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.